just going to pop the words up there real quick. But you can find this in Google Classroom. It just kind of talks about everything we talked about already. You have atoms, and then the atoms combine to make a molecule. Molecules, cell, cell, tissue, tissue, organ, organ, organ system, and so on until you get an organism. So everything combines to form something more complicated. Starts off small, combines to form something bigger. Combines to form something bigger. All right, homeostasis. Homeostasis is a big idea in science, and I know we talked about it in biology, but it is really, really huge in anatomy and physiology. Maintaining a stable internal environment, but it also can be defined as a dynamic state of equilibrium. This idea that our body is constantly trying to keep everything in balance. That's what homeostasis is. It's going to adjust and make little tweaks and movements and adjustments as necessary in order to try and stay within these certain boundaries. Not get too hot, not get too cold, not lose too much water, not lose too much fuel. All of that to make sure that we're meeting certain requirements. You will definitely have a question about homeostasis on your test. Very quiet.
I was trying not to sneeze.
There are these things called feedback loops. There are positive and negative ones. The negative ones are the most common ones that we have in our body. So a negative feedback loop is something that goes and then it shuts itself off. Really, the best way to think of it is kind of like a thermostat in a house. Okay, so when you set a thermostat, let's say you set it at 70 degrees. You want your house to stay at 70 degrees. So it gets too hot in the house and the house gets to 72. So the thermostat detects that the house is now at 72 degrees, and what happens when it gets at 72 degrees? What happens to the house? Yeah, so what does the house do? Yeah, so when it gets to 72 degrees, the heater is gonna stop, and then that way, if the heater was on, like if it's winter time, and so the heater is gonna turn off until it cools back down to 70, okay? And then if it's in the winter time and we want the house at 70 and it starts getting too cold and it drops to 68, what's gonna happen? The heater's gonna come back on, and then it's gonna warm back up to 70. And what happens when it gets to 70? It's gonna turn off. So that is called a negative feedback loop. A negative feedback loop means that to maintain that 70 degrees, that homeostasis, something is going to happen until we get to the point that we need. So in the case of the thermostat, we want 70, but it got too hot. And so the body detected that something was wrong, so it initiates a cycle once that cycle has done its job, it's going to shut it off and turn it off, and then everything's okay. And so it's a negative feedback. But then something else happens. It got too cold, so the body detects it. So it's going to initiate a different cycle to get it back where it needs to be. But once we're back where we need to be, it's going to shut it off and turn it off again. And that's going to be that negative impact, saying, okay, we're okay now, so we're going to have this negative impact to shut it off again. Does that make sense? It's a negative feedback because it's shutting off once the goal has been reached. A fever is a good example of this. Another great example is a fever can, even though fever is used up here, fever is a little harder to understand. Shivering and sweating are really easy ones to understand. So when you are too hot, your body starts to sweat. And when you start to sweat, you evaporate that sweat to cool down. And then once you cool down, you don't sweat anymore. So that's a negative feedback loop because your body has reached its goal, you've cooled down, so you've stopped sweating. And the same is true for shivering. So when you get too cold, your body starts to shiver because your muscles contract to warm you up. But once you get warm, you stop shivering because your goal has been reached, so your body shuts that process down. It's a negative feedback loop. So here's an example. You want to maintain homeostasis. You get too hot, so your body starts to sweat, but once your temperature is reached the point where it needs to be again, it's going to shut that sweating down because you have maintained the temperature you need. Then there's also shivering. So your body has gotten too cold. Your body needs to warm back up. So it's once that shivering has accomplished its goal, you're maintaining homeostasis again, the shivering is going to stop. A negative feedback loop. The process is going to shut down. Now this is different from a positive feedback loop. Positive feedback loops don't shut down. They keep building up and building up and building up until finally some big event happens. Good examples of positive feedback loops, in fact there's only really two examples. Blood clotting is one example. The other is when a woman goes into labor. A blood clot signals like a chain reaction to happen. First with blood clotting, the vessels are going to contract so that more bleeding doesn't happen. Then once the vessels contract, that signals that we need to send blood clotting factors to this area. And then that's going to signal chemicals to be released to this area. And that's going to signal white blood cells to come. And that's going to signal platelets to come. So you see it's more, and it's more, and it's more, and it's more. So more stuff happens, and more stuff happens. And that's a positive feedback loop. Do you guys see the difference here? One of it shuts down, and one of it signals more stuff to happen, and more stuff to happen, and more stuff to happen. That's the difference between the two. There are a lot more negative feedback loops in the body than there are positive feedback. Blood clotting is one, labor is another. Those are the only two I can think of right now. There may be like one more.
I've heard this term before. I always thought it was like a psychological thing, like people like doing drugs or like eating sugar. Is that?
It's drugs can cause more. Like with a drug, you want more, and then you want more, and then you want more. So drugs can cause a positive feedback. Like with drugs, you get it. That's what causes addiction. Is you start with a little bit of a drug, but then that drug isn't enough anymore. So you need a little bit more of the drug to get the effect, and then that isn't enough. So then you need a little bit more of the drug to get even more of the effect, and then so that's a positive feedback.
Okay.
So it's kind of the same idea. And same with like alcoholism. You start with a little bit of a drink, but then you can't get a buzz because your body gets used to the alcohol. So you need a little bit more of the alcohol. And so it's the same idea. It's like you're building up a tolerance. Alright, so another example of a positive feedback loop is labor. And how it works with labor is when a woman has a contraction, oxytocin is the one that causes the contraction. So the uterus is a big muscle and it squeezes the baby. This is the cervix. And so when the baby's head comes in contact with the cervix, it releases a signal to the brain that sends the message that oxytocin should be released. So pressure on the cervix sends a message to the brain that it needs to release oxytocin. Oxytocin causes the uterus to contract. Uterus contracting puts the baby's head more pressure on the cervix. So then more pressure on the cervix sends a message to the brain that more oxytocin should be released, which causes the uterus to contract more, which causes the baby's head to, so you see how this makes a cycle that just builds up, and that's why with labor, it starts off, oh, the contractions aren't that bad, but then the contractions get closer and stronger and closer and stronger until the baby is born. So it's an example of a positive feedback. You don't have to write this down, we kind of already talked about it, but when your body can't maintain homeostasis, disease and death occur. This is why if you get a really high fever, your body is not handling that well. If you get really sick, it's your body's out of balance. Homeostasis is off. This is why it's important for you to take care of yourself. One time my daughter had a fever of 104. She had a really bad ear infection, and I had just gotten off a plane in Florida. And I was like, do I need to get on a plane and come home? Because I was at a conference in Florida. And I was like, and my husband had just taken her to the emergency room. But when your temperature gets that high, homeostasis is gone. And proteins, and I know you guys learned about enzymes start to break down. We learned that it's not good when enzymes break down because enzymes need that certain balance in order to function properly. So, key point slide, and as we remember, key point slides are a good slide because that means we're done with notes. We learned quite a bit today. We learned quite a bit of terms: anatomy, physiology, function follows forms, levels of organization, homeostasis, negative and positive feedback loops. But you do have your first assignment. You are to draw a picture to represent each of the 11 body systems. And for biology classes, we got into body systems a little bit last year. We kind of ran out of time, but we did get into a little bit. So we learned about the 11 body systems very basically. Blake knows all about the 11 body systems. The main functions, the major organs, and at least one disease or disorder that occurs in that system. This can be done on paper or the Chromebook. I suggest paper though. Yeah, because it needs to be hand drawn.
I used the one
Yeah.
I used the one I used last year.
Did you do this?
Yes.
Did you do
I
this
remember
last year?
It's the exact thing.
We did something like
We wrote
that.
about it.
We didn't draw pictures.
Well, that'll help us though.
Our past papers.
Did you do the same thing? I'll make up with a different assignment for you then.
We wrote a paper about it. We did not draw
Well, you have to draw it. And use the internet or the textbook to help you. Yeah.
They did the same exact time.
Well, if you did it in physiology last year, because I can't remember if you did it
Me
or
and
not.
Greg were worried about it.
Yeah.
We were worried about our autistic capabilities. I said autistic.
Because you might have, I can't remember.
I remember
Did you do
doing
it last year? Yeah?
I
Maybe you did.
What do you mean draw a picture of the 11 body? Like draw the bodies?
All the body.
Yes, you have to draw the body system.
Yeah, because we were like asking you like how we were supposed to do that and stuff.
Yeah, maybe we did do it last year.
They're still teaching too hard. Draw the picture.
It's not supposed to be hard.
Is it one picture for each?
I'm not gonna make you do it again, Blake. I'll come up with something different for you.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if I have examples.
Does upper section where
I just brought a bunch, so if I run out. I would assume next. Next Friday or this Friday?
Now that you mentioned it, I kind of do remember you doing this last year.
This Friday or next Friday?
I gave them papers. I'll give you papers. I'll see how much progress you make.
Okay.
I feel like just like
Is it not or what's it from there? Can you turn away to 11? Do we have to color these?
It does have to be in color.
yes,
It has to be beautiful. What?
I don't like the white paper.
Is it not posted?
Is it
I like the
okay
one.
to run back?
Yes, front to back.
That's
I mean, we're gonna be using a lot of paper. I'm accepting it for what it is.
I'm accepting for what it is. I'm so confused about honors.
I'm probably
Honors
gonna
are
use
really easy now.
11 paper.
Why are you honors? That life is. I don't need that. That's not in a rural area. Why do you get accepted in the
No, little pictures of each is fine.
So you still figure your options.
Yeah, I can still get my back to that level.
You have to fight everyone in class. That's the part.
Not really.
I also want to graduate with honors.
I don't.
We'll
A
look
degree
back at later.
is a degree. A degree is a degree. Is a degree.
That's what I'm gonna be doing.
It's kind of neat. That goes a little bit.
Let's go in. Gonna do it. There was like a study came out like 50% of people that they only got like they were like 2.5. Some people were like 50% of people. It was insane.
Yeah, it's posted in there now.
What?
Girl, just see everything.
And maybe that's really cool.
And Blake, give me a moment. I'll come up with something different for you.
Don't have to.
Only one makes it good. Wait, smart.
I like to. I mean, I'll do it again. I'll do it again. I just don't know what to do.
But some
You don't have to do it.
Yes, I'll probably have time. I mean, you can do a bunch of full body. I'm sorry, with the one. Yeah, I'm doing a goal with the body.
Yeah. Here's my digestive.
Like we
I don't know if I can.
what? There was 1,709 applicants and only 122 guys.
Yeah, so May, it was like 2.1.
Give me a check.
If everybody else is okay with that.
Can I turn off the lights?
Yes.
Count the little lines instead of this.
There was 3,000.
Oh, we know that's what it does.
I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
I have unnecessary.
I'm not doing that.
You already know all of it.
I can't see that.
It won't be the same.
It said I should have applied in before July 31st, and they're like, huh? How am I supposed to apply if I didn't know I was going here yet? Because I wanted to be to every not apply mid-sentence.
What?
It's basically a person.
It's like hard to see.
Is it different for parents?
Oh, are you?
Why is it great?
You know, it's fun art project, right? We put all the things over there that you
Well, remember when I did mine on
Yeah, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna watch it.
Oh, Courtney, it's my sister Rachel is extremely nervous about my uncle's arm.
Yeah, it is.
That's definitely not always.
Yeah, it is. I thought it was like. Yeah, that's what I said.
My sister Rachel is extremely nervous because my uncle died. I love how you guys know that.
I never learned. We didn't memorize that shit.
I think at the beginning of the contract.
It was like, I remember early.
I know.
Yeah, I tried to.
Yeah, but you can do
Yeah, there's sometimes both.
Oh, technically there is.
Do you think you say we just get my phone like I'm doing this like I don't got patience.
Miss Ayers, do we have to label this?
Yep. Well,
Well, like,
basic, just what it says on the assignment.
okay.
Oh, she posted.
Yeah, she posted it.
I barely paid. She has a ruler out.
It's getting serious.
Do I have to give you more?
I don't think it is.
Well, it says that I can do and it says you can apply.
Okay, I think it's just because they colored it. So we're gonna erase that, make it not.
It looks good on you.
All of them.
You're like my first art period. And you'll not graduate and you'll not leave me. I'll find you something. It'll be nice. Well, I'll post it. And then I won't be that hard.
Alright, appreciate it.
Appreciate me giving you work.
No, not that, you know what I mean. No, it is.
I'm ready to do it.
She said she will never do that. Like that.
I need to email.
Imagine already worrying about college stuff. I didn't even know I wanted to.
Start.
I'd rather be worrying about this.
I'm so out of practice with these videos.
Oh, you forgot about it, didn't you?